Joining me in studio is Mboya, former CEO of LSK and also a lawyer. I can see Joy Mdivo is just joining us in a bit, but she's just outside. She'll come in as soon as she gets here. We'll just start the discussion straight up. And also we have Dr. Atwoli Lukoye in Eldoret studios. We're still expecting Charles Kanjama in our Kisumu studios as well, so that we just delve deeper into this. But I'll start with Mboya, who's already here on time. Thanks for making time for us.
Thank you.
In your own interpretation,
yes,
what happens next? Because there's been a lot of varied opinion on what the next move is. How do you interpret it?
What happens next is that there must be fresh nomination. And I'm saying this because we look at what now is called obiter dicta of the 2013 judgment. Obiter dicta are the observations that were given by the judges in that decision. And if you go to paragraph 290, they looked at this particular scenario. This was not the main thing they were looking at in the petition, but they went out to paint certain scenarios. And on paragraph 290, they indeed looked at exactly what has happened. And in their own opinion, they said that then Article 138, sub-article 8b, then kicks in, which requires that fresh nominations ensues.
Yeah. So during this period where there's the fresh nominations, what happens in the presidency?
The presidency is still in temporary incumbency because the Constitution also says that the president will continue until he hands over to the next president when that election is done. And I think, Trevor, we need to inform the public that indeed the IEBC had gazetted that there's going to be an election of 2 candidates. And those 2 candidates, there will not going to be a fresh elections. Now, of course, that particular gazette notice has now since been frustrated by the action that has just taken place right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me bring in Dr. Lukoye Atwoli from Eldoret and find out, what is your reading of this? What happens next?
Yeah, I've seen many people painting this as a legal or constitutional crisis. I think this is not entirely accurate. This is a political problem and will be solved using political methods, not legal methods. Because as many of the lawyers will tell you, the path appears clear so far. Already the IEBC has regulations about the implications of withdrawal from an election. And these appear to define what it means to withdraw from an election, that once a nomination has been done, if you do not want to participate, you withdraw within 3 days. If that is not done, then your name is on the ballot. And so it appears to me that if IEBC bullishly follows the law, they may attempt, as some people are suggesting, to have an election on 26th of October. However, the political implications of such a move are such that I think it would be foolhardy for them to do so. They must find a way. If the High Court does not make another ruling that includes other players in this election, they must find a way of accommodating the parties to this election. Otherwise, I think we are looking at a political crisis, in my view, not a legal or constitutional crisis at the moment.
Lukoye, there are people who've been arguing that President Uhuru should just be sworn in and declared the winner unopposed. What do you take of that? Including himself. He just said that they would go for the polls whether Raila is there or not.
I think those are people who are legally illiterate.
Yes, go on.
Because there has been nominations. We were going to have an election. And you know, this candidate has withdrawn. You cannot say, on the one hand, that his withdrawal has no legal effect because he did not withdraw within the 3 days of the nomination, and on the other hand say, now the other candidate is declared elected and opposed. You cannot eat your cake and have it.
Okay.
I think this is where political propaganda and things that are outside of the law start to play a role in this discussion.
All right. And joining us now is Joy Mdivo, also a lawyer. We were just speaking about the interpretation. What is your interpretation? What happens next?
First, I must admit that I'm of the school of thought that if there's a withdrawal with the effect that Rule 52 envisages, it must be done within the nomination period. And the effect of that is because in Kenya, we access power through political parties. Now, political parties need flag bearers, but the flag bearers are found by a nomination process in the party. Now, if a candidate decides, even if I have been duly nominated, I do not wish to run, there's nothing that can force them to run. But what happens now is you have a party that has a ticket but has no flag bearer. Now, that rule was envisaged so that the party, if they're still willing to participate in the election, have got time to find a fresh candidate. But from what we saw today, the candidate seems unwilling. Wiper, who was a partner party in the coalition, also seemed unwilling to proceed. And the party itself also seems totally oblivious to wanting to proceed. Therefore, even when you talk about fresh nominations, why would we go for fresh nominations if the parties are completely unwilling to cooperate with the process as it is? Because let us not forget that these irreducible minimums that were given by NASA do not have the force of law. There are suggestions of, look, we want this done before we go to an election. But with all due respect, it's not up to NASA to say what happens. It's up to the law. That's the Constitution, the Election Act, the rules that have been set in place, and the IEBC, because constitutionally, they're the ones who are mandated to run an election. So for us to come to a place where, as a political party, we look and we say, look, with what we are seeing, it looks like doom and gloom, and guess what? The room is too dark, we are not going in. That's perfectly fine and perfectly in order.
So what happens
but
now that they've decided to do that?
But now to suggest that everybody else now is subjected to what is the provisions of Article 138(8) of the Constitution, yeah, I think is a bit of an overreach. All that happens is you do not participate, your people don't go out to vote, but now you've got 2 weeks to go. I imagine the papers are already being printed in Dubai somewhere. Right. If somebody decides that they are going to still carry on with an election, people who want to come and vote for you can go ahead and vote for you. Those who don't want to vote for you can go ahead and stay at home. Those who want to come and vote, because remember, Okuru is still in court. Tomorrow he might be told, you know what, you might as well be on the ballot paper.
Will that not be a valid election, if that even happens?
Why would it not be valid? As long as the IEBC has conducted an election within 60 days, that is before the 1st of November, it has the force of law, because actually, legally speaking, they're the only ones constitutionally mandated to organize elections in Kenya. No one else is.
Apollo, what do you make of that argument?
Yeah, first of all, I want to agree with Atwoli that there are legal issues, but substantially where the territory where we are going to is more political. I still am of the view that the obiter dicta that had been given by the Supreme Court, that the Supreme Court used the word abandoned before the scheduled date. Now there's a scheduled date, which is 26th. And I keep on talking about that gazette notice. Remember, there's a gazette notice by the IEBC saying who are the candidates, indeed. But now, one has abandoned. And this is what the Supreme Court looked at. And this was not the main thing they were looking at, but they veered and made some observation. There has to be fresh nominations. What Joy is saying, yes, if there's fresh, why do we go for fresh nominations when they are unwilling? What the court gave was a route to explore in solving the political problem that we have. But substantially where we are heading to is a political terrain. Now, I want also to talk about the question of election. Will the elections be legally? Is that the question that you just put to Joy? Yeah. First of all, elections must be done in 290 constituencies for the presidential. My interpretation is that in case, and I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, in case NASA and its base ensures that there is no election in any of those constituencies, then the election would not have been conducted as provided in the Constitution and the applicable laws.
And that by ensuring that there's no election is that nobody turns up. However,
exactly.
The systems will be there because the polling stations will be there waiting for people to show up.
Exactly.
So if one person shows up, then it makes the election valid then, right?
Yes. If somebody turns up in a polling station, even if it's one, election has been conducted there. And I agree with that.
In my opinion, that is a fallacy. Yeah. An election would be deemed to be conducted as long as the opportunity has been given to Wananchi to come and participate. Even if 0 Wananchi participate, the election has been conducted. The return is 0. but the election has been conducted.
But then how do you then get a valid
No, in this
leader?
election of 8th of August, there was a polling station where nobody turned up to vote. Those guys sat there the whole day. The polling station, I think, had 3 or 5 voters or something, and none of the 5 who were registered there turned up. It got to 5 p.m. and those guys just entered a nil return, packed up their boxes and walked away. That is an election, because an election can be by ballot, or it can be by abstention. We cannot force people to go to the ballot box if they do not want to come. Now, if NASA, through their machinations, decide that they're going to cause violence so that an election does not happen, then the Electoral Offences Act is very clear, and they will be dealt with the full extent of the law. Because what we are seeing right now, even with how CS Matiang'i is behaving, there seems to be, we are now in, as we say, uncharted waters. Yeah. But if they decide, you know what, we are not participating, we're not turning up, and even the supporters of NASA decide, you know what, we are not turning up, then it's one of those parties where you invite people and only your family turns up. You go ahead and have a dad party, but you just have a dad party nonetheless. Because if you as a player have decided, I'm not going to play in this game, why then would you begrudge those who decide that they're going to carry on playing? Okay. It's not even, it does not invalidate the process if NASA does not turn up. Okay. If the IEBC fails to organize an election, then there'll be none. But if the IEBC organizes an election and NASA chooses not to participate, it will still be a valid election. Okay.
Let me bring in Charles Kanjama from our Kisumu studios, and he's just joined us. Thanks for making time for us. What is your interpretation? What happens next now that Raila has decided to withdraw from the presidential race?
Thank you, Trevor, for inviting me, and greetings to Apollo and Joy. My feeling is that we have 2 institutions that will be critical in determining the outcome of the current situation. The first is the Independent Electro and Boundaries Commission. They have to sit and decide, are we having elections within 60 days as decided by the Supreme Court, or not, on the basis of the withdrawal of Prime Minister Raila Odinga. If they say that we are having elections, then that whole scenario that Joy has been talking about kicks in. Are those elections valid? Have they taken place in 290 constituencies? And so on. If they decide there are no elections taking place, then there are 2 scenarios also. One, they could say we will have fresh nominations, say within 30 days, and then elections within a further 60 days. Or they could say that no, there's one candidate who has remained validly nominated, and he will be declared the president-elect. Whatever of these 3 choices they take, there will be Kenyans who will be happy and Kenyans will be unhappy with their outcome. Those Kenyans can go to the court, the High Court in some of the instances and the Supreme Court in some of the other instances. And the court will decide and the decision will be final. End of story.
Okay. Let me bring in Dr. Lukoye Atwoli in Eldoret. And one of the things Charles Kanjama is bringing up is that they can decide to declare the president-elect as is and unopposed. But how would that happen, and yet the Supreme Court already said that that particular election was not valid?
Yeah. So people are basing that assumption on the fact that we are still in the nomination period and that a candidate has withdrawn from the race. If that were the case, then indeed you could declare the remaining candidate to be validly elected. But my take is that we are out of the nomination period. We are heading towards the election. If somebody withdraws from the election at that point, then there are certain things that come into play. One of them is correctly, as Kanjama has said, that the IEBC could bullishly decide to go ahead with the election and have whatever kind of election they will try to have on 26th and move on with it. But the political situation as it is now would make it foolhardy to do that. And one of the things that was raised was whether the election would be valid if held on 26th, despite one candidate not participating actively. And my take is an election or any activity can be legal, but lack legitimacy. At the end of the day, you want to have a product that is legitimate, that enjoys the confidence of the voters, and a person who can rule the country with the full confidence that they won an election. So it can be legal but illegitimate. And secondly, there's a huge danger of trying to force an election on 26th. The danger comes in the way of people who have said that if NASA can do something to prevent an election from taking place in one constituency, then the election would be invalid. And there are conceivably people who might take actions or attempt to take actions to prevent an election from happening in at least one constituency. The government will handle it the way the government will handle it, but we all know that it doesn't end well. So the way out of this, I think, is another route, that IEBC must be more creative in dealing with this political crisis without being unnecessarily legalistic, as my friends here are trying to suggest. It is time for them to start exploring perhaps the route of the fresh nominations, allowing everybody who is interested to come into play. Even if NASA are not interested in going forward with the election, there will be other individuals who will be interested and will participate in the nominations, and we have an election that is both valid, legal, and legitimate.
We're still trying to make heads and tails of what the repercussions of Raila Odinga's withdrawal from the presidential race means. Charles Kanjama is still with me from Kisumu. Dr. Lukoye Atwoli is with me from Eldoret, and Mdivo, a lawyer, is also with me in studio, and Mboya is also with me. Let me start with Charles Kanjama in Kisumu, and help me understand. Article 140, and I have it with me, of the Constitution, Part 3, says that if the Supreme Court determines an election of the president-elect to be invalid, a fresh election shall be held within 60 days after that particular determination. Read that together with Article 138(8) that says a presidential election shall be cancelled and a new election held if B, a candidate for election as president or deputy president, dies on or before the scheduled election date, and 9 goes ahead and says that a new presidential election under Clause 8 shall be held within 60 days. The Constitution itself did not envision any other scenario that the election is not held within 60 days after the first one has been annulled. Are we facing a constitutional crisis here?
Trevor, I'd like to define constitutional crisis as a situation which the framers of the Constitution did not contemplate, and therefore, if we find ourselves in that situation, we have to look for alternative means of resolving the conundrum. So I would say that yes, we would be in a constitutional crisis if an election is not held within 60 days, and there does not seem to be a mechanism that is clearly provided to determine the way forward. But thankfully, we have two key institutions, and Trevor, that's what I was saying. We have the IEBC, which has the constitutional mandate of determining whether elections can be held within the 60 days, and if so, in which form. And then we have the courts, the Supreme Court and the High Court, which can determine whether IEBC's decisions are correct, they are consistent with the broader constitutional principles. And I think ultimately the Supreme Court said, hold elections within 60 days. The Supreme Court will need to tell us, are there any circumstances in which failure to hold those elections within 60 days is acceptable? And has the interpretation of the NASA coalition fit the test of the Constitution for extending that period? Because ultimately, if NASA has correctly interpreted the Constitution, then we'll need to have fresh nominations and fresh elections after another 60 to 90 days. But if NASA has not correctly interpreted the constitutional provisions, then they'll have lost the opportunity to compete in the fresh elections, and Uhuru will be declared the victor. So what is happening is that NASA is engaging in a high-stakes game. It's a game of brinkmanship. They could win, and it would appear to be a brilliant political move. They could lose, and then it would appear to be a very unfortunate and misinformed decision that they made.
Dr. Lukoye,
Those are those are the choices we are facing right now.
Okay. Dr. Lukoye from Eldoret, the articles I've just read, and NASA seems to be arguing from the Supreme Court decision of 2013 that includes if a candidate abandons the electoral quest before the scheduled date, then the provisions of Article 138, which says there will be fresh nominations, is actually applied. So that sort of goes against what the Constitution says, because in that, is there a loophole there, do you reckon?
I don't think it goes against what the Constitution says. In 2013, when the Supreme Court suggested that the Article 138(8) would apply equally to withdrawal or death of a candidate, they were attempting to fill what I think had been drawn to their attention by one of the parties to the petition, I think it was the AG, as to what then happens if the election is declared null and void and then one of the candidates leaves and so on. They beat around the bush quite a bit, suggesting that if only one person petitions, then only those two should be in the fresh election, and that if another party petitions, then all the candidates should be in the election and so on. But the final determination about withdrawing was that it is equivalent to a candidate dying. There are many thoughts about that kind of thinking. Myself, I would think that that's relatively strange. But I think they were desperate to fill in what they perceive to be a lacuna, exactly like has happened today when a candidate has withdrawn from an election after the nomination period. So, I mean, declaring fresh nominations and running another election is not running contrary to the election, to the Constitution, but it is actually addressing a problem that is real, a problem that exists, and in a manner that might result in a legitimate election, rather than a strictly legalistic interpretation, which would say that we have to have an election on 26th of October.
Okay. Joe, is that also your reading? Article 143, and then there's the Supreme Court decision, and then there's the Elections Act 2011. Is that also your reading, that there's no constitutional crisis?
There's no constitutional crisis, but I have a slightly, it's not very off base from where Dr. Lukoye is coming from and where Charles was coming from. Yeah. I choose to read this from Article 134 through to Article 148. So you start with the incumbency. What happens from the first day when the election has been called, then you have presidential incumbency. So what that means is the president is holding power, but is waiting to pass on the baton or to be reconfirmed in the position if he's still eligible to run. Now we got to August 8th and incumbency started. And then when we moved forward, we had an election petition that was successful. Now when the election petition was successful, what happens? Again, the Constitution is not silent. It says, you know what, from the date of the judgment, we are going to have an election organized within 60 days. The Supreme Court went ahead and affirmed that position that is going to be, that is the correct position. So from where I stand, IEBC still have until the 1st of November to comply with both the Constitution and the Supreme Court ruling to organize a fresh election within 60 days. Now, when you come to Article 138(8), where a candidate abandons, I agree with Dr. Lukoye, it's a little bit strange that the obiter dictum of 2013 decision would be that that is equivalent to death because, hello, they're not dead, they're still here. So, what then becomes the interpretation? Because again, as Dr. Lukoye correctly pointed out, we are no longer in the nomination stage. We are past the nomination stage. In my opinion, the only way out of this, or rather the most painless way out of this, would be to carry through with the election as envisaged. Because if we get to the 1st of November and we have not had a fresh election, then who has the right to call a new election? At that time, the courts are functus official. They already made their decision. They said within 60 days, matter is finished and done with, and until there's another presidential election, you're just going back to the Supreme Court for interpretations. Yeah. President is already in incumbency. At this point, he cannot hire judges, he cannot fire judges, he cannot hire CSs, he cannot hire commissioners. Okay. So he's operating as commander-in-chief and as a chief of the executive, but beyond that, he's not. So he cannot, against Womoto, call for a fresh election. IEBC, on the other hand, can only call elections within the purview of the law. Once it gets to 2nd of November, they have no authority to decide, no, what, we're going to have an election next week. So what's the fallback position? You go back to the Constitution. What does the Constitution say? It's the 2nd Tuesday of August, 5 years from the last elections. That takes us to 2022. What does that mean? Then we have an incumbent enjoying incumbency until we get to August 8th, 2022. So if I look at it, it's not a crisis. It's just one of those things that is uncharted waters. It is extremely strange. But I feel the pain of the people that we saw giving their reactions, because for the common Mwananchi, we thought we had an end in sight, and now clearly we do not have an end in sight. I understand where Honorable Raila is coming from, because if you're very concerned with this process and you're not seeing a way out, why would you go and wait for the inevitable? I mean, he's an astute politician and he's got credible people sitting around him telling him, by the way, boss, it doesn't look good. We need a way out of this. So this could be a way of managing the disintegration of the entire process. Okay. However, on the other hand, there are the Kenyans who are supporting him. They're rooting for him. Where does that leave them? So it's not exactly a crisis constitutionally or legally from my reading. Yeah. It's more of a crisis politically, because as Dr. Lukoye and even Apollo correctly pointed out, when you lack legitimacy, you might be legally in office, but you're there with that dark cloud of, by the way, you know, you didn't really get here on merit. Yeah. You're here sort of by default. Okay. Is that what they're going for? I am not too sure. The next few days will be very interesting to see how it's broken down. Okay,
Kanjama and Atwoli, you can jump in any time from Eldoret and Kisumu bureaus as long as the discussion continues. But is that your reading as well?
Yeah. No. If you give Kanjama that fiat, you know, I know Kanjama. I can tell you, he will take the whole of it. But let me first agree with him first. Yeah. The interpretation by all the panelists actually is correct. And there's only one aspect that Kanjama brought out that I think we need to amplify. Yeah. Can there be any other election beyond 60 days? That is the only uncharted area. Yeah. Yes. Otherwise, the situation that we are actually experiencing, and as Atwoli has rightly pointed out, the Supreme Court, it was drawn to the attention of the Supreme Court. Yeah. And indeed, they made some observation about that. And I want to agree with the interpretation that the Supreme Court used the word abandon. Okay? They added the word abandon. Abandon is not in the Constitution, but the Constitution talks about death. Yes. Okay? But I want to agree that when somebody abandons, it is as the same as the elements that are covered within Article 138, sub-Article 8B, where somebody has also died. So I agree, where we need now to interrogate is only whether there can be election after 60 days. And what are these instances? That's the only area that is not clear. Otherwise, all other aspects, we have been given a route on how to untangle it and to address the issues.
Go ahead.
Trevor, so my thinking in answering the question, any legal question, any constitutional question, including whether we can have an election beyond the 60 days, is to go back to why we put those laws in place in the first place, why we wrote that constitution in the first place. It was to ensure fairness, it was to ensure predictability in the interactions between the governors and the ruled. So if a proper election has not been held under the law and under the Constitution, and the Constitution doesn't say what next, and the law doesn't say what next, we still go back, either the courts can make a determination, or the IEBC can make a decision that in their judgment addresses the spirit of the law, which is to ensure that we have a legitimately and legally elected president in office for 5 years, rather than having a temporary incumbent for 5 years. Because you have to weigh which is the worst evil. The worst evil, in my view, is to have somebody in office with limited powers for 5 years, waiting for the next election. It would be better for the IEBC to interpret whatever provisions there are in law progressively to ensure we have an election and we get a president who is properly elected and a president who enjoys legitimacy and who enjoys the confidence of the people of Kenya.
All right.
Any other consideration, I think, would be anathema to the spirit of the Constitution and the spirit with which we come together as Kenyans and agree to be ruled under the rule of law.
All right. And Kanjama, can someone go to court and claim contempt of court? Because the Supreme Court said the election should be held within 60 days. Can someone go to court and say that they did not follow what the court said and this is now contempt of court?
I think, Trevor, rather than someone going to court, IEBC needs to have a clear way out of this morass, and their way has to involve a determination within the 60 days of whether they are going to hold an elections in the sense of having ballot boxes, ballot papers, presiding officers, and so on, where one candidate has already decided to withdraw, or where alternatively they are going to say we are not going to hold the process of elections because there is a president-elect. Alternatively, they would need to be able to tell the Supreme Court before the 60 days, we need more time to carry out the fresh elections because you gave us 60 days and it has become impossible to do the elections within that period. So I don't contemplate IEBC waiting for the 61st day so that someone can go to court and cite them for contempt. I think they'll be proactive. They'll either want to close this process within 60 days decisively and declare somebody as president-elect, either after doing an exercise or not, or they will want to go back to the Supreme Court quickly and either seek a further opinion or seek an extension of the time, which of course raises its own constitutional challenges, because the Supreme Court was to give its decision within 14 days of the previous election petition. And the question will arise, does the Supreme Court have any fresh jurisdiction or mandate to start interfering in a process that has not yet completed so that it can come back to the Supreme Court? So it's a real challenging situation, and I think there will need to be very clever minds and sober minds at IEBC and their legal team to find their way out of this. But let me say something, Trevor, which I think is critical.
Yeah.
We are assuming that the withdrawal of Honorable Raila Odinga is already effective. And if I was a member of the legal team of IEBC, the first thing I would say is this: it's not enough to make a public statement. It's not even enough to send a letter. The letter has to be clear. The signatures have to be authenticated. I would probably even call the two candidates, because you'd want to have signatures of both Honorable Raila Odinga and Kalonzo Musyoka. Don't forget, under Regulation 52 of the regulations, there's even a specific form that should be filled. And I've not heard that that form has been filled.
All right.
Remember that Wilson Sossion stated in public that he has withdrawn from being a nominated MP.
Yeah.
A few days later, we saw him being sworn in. So that it's not enough to make a public statement, no matter how solemn. I would probably call the candidates, Raila Amolo Odinga and Stephen Kalonzo Musyoka, and ask them to confirm whether they're withdrawing. Ask them to sign above the dotted line on a certain form.
All right, Dr.
Once they've done so is when IEBC would then be required to take the next step in the process.
Okay, Dr. Lukoye, I want you to give us your final remarks really quick. We're running out of time here. The way forward, what do we do now? Because you've said that elections can be held, may be legal, but not legitimate.
Yeah, I hold the view that we do not create or have a democracy for its own sake, or for the sake of individuals. We have a democracy to protect certain values. And we must always go back to those values to ask ourselves, why are we here? Why are we together? And do we want to stay together? And as long as we agree, the way a couple in a marriage agree every day that they want to stay together, then it becomes easy to solve any problem, whether legal, whether constitutional, whenever they come. Because we can always go back to the values that we hold dear as a people in this country.
All right.
So when we engage in chest thumping, when we do not listen to each other, when we cite the law and parliamentary majority or minority to pass our points, what values are we protecting? I think that is what Kenyans need to go back to if we are going to resolve all these crises that are coming to us going forward.
All right. Apollo, very fast.
Yes.
Solutions then. What's the next thing?
Yes. If Raila signs Form 24A, that is the prescribed form for withdrawal, then I see that the next election will be in January 2018, 10th January.
So 90 days.
Yeah, 2018.
All right.
Yes.
Joy, final say?
In my opinion, I agree with Dr. Lukoye that this was a problem created by politicians. Leaders ought to provide solutions for the people that they lead. They ought not to be the problem that the people have. And right now we are in a situation whereby our leaders have become very hardened in their positions. The parties have coalesced around their candidates and have dug in, because remember even Chairman Kati said that sometimes he would rather deal with the principals rather than the lieutenants, because the lieutenants offer no way forward. And so I would call upon the leaders of this country. Honorable Raila is a statesman. Honorable Uhuru is trying to go for a legacy run. You guys are going to be written in the history of this nation. Put Kenya first. We still have 2 weeks within which to salvage this situation. Okay. Like Kanjama said, you can have written the letter today and tomorrow you say something else, because we saw we are not going to Supreme Court and we ended up going to Supreme Court. Okay. There's still time to salvage something out of this. All right. The law, we will argue, we will go to Supreme Court. The judges will wear their diapers and sit there all day long. But at the end of the day, morally, as a people, will we feel that we've come out of this process better or worse? All right. Let our leaders take one for us.
We have to leave it there. Thanks for making time. Charles Kanjama in Kisumu, a lawyer. Dr. Lukoye Atwoli in Eldoret. Joy Mdivo, also a lawyer, right here with me in Apollo Mboya. Thanks for making time. And thank you for watching Decision 2017. These uncharted waters, like we mentioned, but you can trust NTV to give you everything that you need. We'll take you through this step by step as we also try to understand them. Read Article 138, Article 140, the Supreme Court ruling, the Supreme Court decision of 2013, the Elections Act 2011. We'll be making heads and tails of all this as time goes by. Remember, the IEBC has confirmed receiving that letter, but they said that they're still reviewing what the next step is going to be. We'll be right here to tell you what that next step is.